And as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, that the state opposition was introducing to the upper house of the Victorian Parliament a private member's bill which would ensure that Paul Charles Denyer, the Frankston mass murderer, triple killer, could not make any further bid for parole. Now, I've been campaigning on this for at least a week since he was refused parole because of the hell it puts the families through. Now, it's all right, so the parole board will make a decision and he won't get out, but he's entitled to reapply for parole as he wishes, and therefore the families are sitting there saying, oh, does he get out this time? Does he get out this time? The opposition had an answer. There's already legislation that can be adjusted. John Pisciuto, when he's in here on Monday, told me, yes, they would do this. Well, they're doing it. All it required was the government to support it. Well, we asked our state political reporter, Steph Wacklewick, to ask the Premier whether he would support this legislation to keep Paul Giles Denyer in jail, never to be released. This is what the Premier said.
No, he is where he belongs. And I think it is highly unlikely, on my reading of it and my understanding, highly unlikely that the Adult Parole Board would be entertaining another application anytime soon. Again, it's very rare that we would do what others are putting forward. I think the appropriate thing is to have confidence and faith in the process.
What others are putting forward? Well, Steph went on to ask whether the Premier would ever consider legislation to keep him in jail.
No, obviously I was part of that law, so no, we wouldn't rule that out. No.
Hey, I don't quite understand. He says no and then says he wouldn't rule it out. Anyway, well, I've got no idea what he means by that. The problem here, as I've explained many times, Denyer can apply for parole anytime he likes. Just put in a form. Whether he gets a hearing or not is another matter. And the parole board, of course, has to consider it. That's the way the system works. That can be sidestepped and he can be kept in jail indefinitely, which will help the victims if the Premier is willing to do it. On the line, Shadow Minister for Corrections, himself a former police officer and a corrections officer, Brad Batten. Good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Do you know why the Premier's rejected this?
Look, I suppose that'd be a question for the Premier, but to me that's just a pig-headed response because it's the opposition doing it. He's not taking into consideration. And as you've said, I think the parole board will do their job. However, every time this happens, the families, instead of celebrating the lives of the people they've lost 30 years ago, have to live the horrific events every time this happens. And I just think that's unfair on them.
I've been dealing with the Russell family since it was first suggested there could be parole probably a year ago. I know it was hurting them. I know how much it was hurting them. They've had enough hurt in their lives, losing their daughter. What was your legislation? Well, will you still present your bill or not?
Yes, so the bill's been presented into the upper house today. So we've put the first reading of it in. It goes through the process. There'll be a second reading. It'll have to be debated in the upper house. So the government will have to vote this legislation down. We'll work with the crossbenchers. Obviously, Liberal Democrats will be supportive of this. We've spoken to them already. Everybody knows there is a connection there already with David and the family. So we will make sure that we go to all of the crossbenchers and hopefully it'll go past the upper house and then it will fall back to Daniel Andrews. Will he allow it to go through the lower house so these families' minds can be put at rest, that they don't have to live this ordeal again?
How do you take politics out of it? I mean, I would hope politics was out of it. Maybe it's not. Is there any way at all you can see through this?
I'll send an email out to all MPs, doesn't matter what persuasion they are, and explain to them what we've got, why we're doing it, and the reasons behind it. We'll let them know that we've spoken to, not just, as I said, David's spoken to some of the family members as well, David Limbrook, but I've actually also spoken to some of the police officers who were down in that area at the time, who they have to live with this as well every time it happens. The stress it causes them to live through the ordeal of what happened in that community is detrimental to their health, and I just think we need to stop that happening. So I want to take the politics out of it. I'll meet with any one of them. I will stand side by side with Daniel Andrews as he wants so we can get this through. It doesn't faze me who does what and when, but we need to get this through.
The parole board is required to consider it if Denyer applies, is it not?
Yeah, when Daniel Andrews said that he doesn't think the parole board will consider an application again, every application has to be considered. You can't say, we're just not going to accept it from you. That's what this legislation does. That's what we did with Craig Minogue, and that's what we did with Julian Knight. We actually said to them, you can't apply anymore. That's been tried in court. The legislation has stood up and they can't apply for parole. That's what we want to say happens here. And for Daniel Andrews to say that they won't consider it, they have to. Now, that doesn't mean I have faith the parole board will not let him out, but this isn't what this is about. This is every 2 years when he puts an application in, that the family have to live through this again and be reminded of what happened in 1993.
Well, I couldn't find in the parole board answers to questions how often you can apply. Having been refused parole, how soon can he apply again?
Well, you can keep applying, and they can say at specific times, look, we've only just had an application. But we were actually talking about this this morning. It's pretty silent on it. You could do it in 12 months, 18 months, 2 years.
And as you say, there are already laws that are, and there have been 3 times. Gary David was kept in jail indefinitely because he wrote a manifesto. He's now dead, but a manifesto about shooting up Flinders Street. And Craig Minogue and Julian Knight are both in jail indefinitely. There are many who have been sentenced to jail indefinitely, obviously, but that's under different laws. Denyer was entitled to apply for parole after 30 years. But the precedent exists. It's not setting in. What I can't understand the reluctance here.
Yeah, there's the precedent's there. And also, if you go back to the original sentence of Paul Denyer, which was by Justice Vincent, he actually gave the reasons why he gave a life sentence with no parole, and it was on appeal that the parole came. So the original sentence was life with no parole. The justice system has a role to do. If it got to today and the people within the justice system were saying, hey, there's been a process, Paul Denyer's gone through for rehabilitation, he's admitted certain things and taken responsibility and shown remorse, that's a different story. But this man has shown none of that. So that's why I say, well, why should he get the benefit of putting these families through that pain again? And I don't know, maybe he enjoys it. But I myself think that has to stop. And I implore Daniel Andrews, like the community, as I said, the police, they feel this every time it comes up. Those that were down there that went through from the first murder through, who feel guilty for the other ones that have happened. Like there's a lot of things and a lot of people impacted by this. Did
you ever come across Denyer when you were a prison officer?
No, I worked down in Wanron, so I never had any chance to see him down there. I was in the prison system from 1995 to 1997.
Okay, thank you. Better rephrase that. Thank you very much, Brad Batten. He worked in the prison system for those years. Shadow Minister for Corrections. Look, am I overreacting to this? Is Brad Batten right or wrong?